The American bourgeois and consumers have consistently tried to emulate the hood in aesthetic and extract from our culture and reality. But what about when the same structure not only emulates, but clones us entirely? Not as something to put on, but as a weapon to be used against us as a people. This is the story of They Cloned Tyrone. It's an amazing movie, but its analysis comes from a skewed perception of reality. That being said, the hood does get cloned.
Nope, not convincing. Damn it. Find your core character, Sean. You are an oppressed black man from the ghetto. Yeah, I'm having trouble finding this one.
Through film, through media, extracting everything it can out of our complex reality to leave what equates to a husk. Empty, twisted, torn, and battered. There are also those with our faces sent to control us and direct us. But it may not be who you or this movie thinks it is.
A part of it is like they use the character. You got Fontaine, who's like a drug dealer. You got Slick Charles, who's like a pimp. You got Yo-Yo, who's like a sex worker. And they try to use them as like, particularly like Slick Rick and Fontaine, or Slick Charles, not Slick Rick.
Slick is a Charles.
Lottie-dottie. Like, okay, we reproduce y'all to do harm, you know what I mean, in the black community. It's something about that bothered me. Everything can be reduced to pimps and drug dealers as like, they're the problem in the black community, right? And they, you know, later on they kind of redeem it and like, you know, talk about this broader structure. But it's something interesting to me that those were the three archetypes they chose to represent black folks. And not to say it's not black folks who not do that, you know what I mean? Or, you know, I know people who sold drugs and that wasn't the only thing they did. That was like a side hustle. But, you know, they weren't, you know, this one-dimensional character, you know what I mean?
Facts.
Type of person, right? Like you said, they had to do what the fuck they had to do.
Kind of clocked it off rip. There's this very sort of black excellence bit to it, right? This expectation to, you know, just sort of rise up and overcome your condition by any means necessary, right? My whole thing, for most people, that's just not realistic. That's just not tangible. You're literally asking them too much to overcome a system that's designed to keep them in this condition.
Seeing us as two-dimensional. When they clone us for their stories, brands, fads, and bigotry, they reduce us to particular archetypes that boil our personhood down to a few traits that are overall seen as undesirable. Traits that a system and populace of privileged oppressors see as maladaptive. Now, that assertion is fundamentally incorrect and comes from seeing specific actions and behaviors out of context and with a great lacking of understanding. Maladaptive is defined as actions that prevent people from adapting, adjusting, or participating in different aspects of life. So these are actions that are intended to help relieve or avoid stress, but they are often disruptive and may contribute to increased distress, discomfort, and anxiety over time. The problem is, much of that, given the reality folks are living through, is not maladaptive at all. Things central to being able to adapt and survive in your environment are not maladaptive. It's actually quite the opposite. What is seen instead is you remove an individual from an environment full of meaning, risk, solidarity, and danger, where specific actions have substantial, sometimes fatal meaning and consequences. Then throw them in an environment that has completely different rules, boundaries, and ethics. More often than not, a lack thereof. For example, unwanted prolonged eye contact leading to conflict is often seen as evidence of folks' ignorance, when in truth, it's those who have privilege that are suffering from the disease of ignorance. Not understanding that you're not only often being rude, but projecting yourself as attempting to intimidate or threaten. Though, in all honesty, I question if the obsession with eye contact in the Western culture is not in itself tied to domination. Many times, the folks evaluating our behavior are doing a shit ton of macroaggressions. Yes, I said macro, not micro. From these flawed perceptions that often boil us down to certain archetypes. I will quickly break down three prominent ones that are prevalent in this movie. The gorilla or Debo. The Debo is not just a criminal or a doughboy, but is someone who only knows how to navigate through guerrilla tactics. A real might makes right type nigga. The way it's often presented is that the aggressive behavior is innate, or a form of compensation, never giving context outside of nature or insecurity for why they move that way. It doesn't even take a backstory to do that, but it's always neglected. I'd argue intentionally. Fontaine was, for example, depicted as a Debo type nigga.
I'm tired of your presence. Dismissed.
The pimp named Slickback. The slick pimp caricature is again missing any context outside of these maladaptive traits, specifically a profound sense of insecurity, a need to demean those around him to elevate themselves, being flamboyant and generally spineless, while being slightly queer-coded despite being straight as a motherfucking arrow, which of course is Slick Charles. The 304. Yo-Yo held too much complexity to fit exclusively into this trope, being very three-dimensional, more of a full complex person. However, Biddy embodied thus caricature of a sex worker in the hood. The Jezebel trope mixed with a large lack of loyalty, being a stake out for exclusively herself, willing to sell anyone down the road for a quick dollar, lacking any intellectual prowess outside of sucking dick. However, these tropes of course misread these behaviors and reduce our people to nothing but a shell of an identity. They don't see how the Debo is often a creation of society, not allowing certain men to be anything but a force of nature. I'm no Debo, but due to my size, I face immense social consequences from not conforming to that. I'm supposed to be an oaf, utilizing guerrilla tactics to get my way. Despite how much society claims it wants something else, I see what it rewards, not only for myself, but many primarily big black men. When it comes to the pimp named Slickback, the trope doesn't address how many of them were sexualized and assaulted by many older women, so many in fact that they've grown a certain perception of themselves and their masculinity. And no matter how much he actually cares about the women under him, he's stuck in a role of the exploiter, not being allowed to grow or knowing how to change in the first place. The 304, who may scam, steal, and yes, some even give up info, do so because she's lived in a world where pretty much every person she's ever met, especially men, have exploited her. Not to mention, there's only one type of person that may be in any of these positions. They don't fit into any nice little box that y'all may want to put them in. Nonetheless, they face social consequences from society for not conforming. We are also expected to flatten ourselves, to have little depth and complexity, to not be a full person. It does not acknowledge the long list of traumas that shape us, or see the other sides of our personality or personhood.
That's where the movie falls short, is that in painting, the hood and most definitely painting the streets as this caricature, right? This caricature that's based largely off of the historical depiction in media of what the streets are, of what hustling looks like, of what the mind of a dope boy, the mind of a pimp, the mind, you feel me, of a chain snatcher, of a stick up kid, or whoever, what their mind it's based more on that than actually having a conversation with those folk and seeing how their mind works and seeing how they look at the world, how they view the world. Because if you actually sit there and have a because I had to be at that place too, where I had to be putting my place in check and say, listen, it ain't that I don't know, it's that I don't have the time nor the resources to address the so-called bigger picture. I still got to find a way to survive. The most frustrating part of the movie is, like you said, it gets into that a little bit with Yo-Yo. Part of me feels like they stopped just short of really digging into that, because then it would contradict the political analysis of the movie, right? Like if we really dig into why, because Yo-Yo she didn't want to grow up to be no streetwalker. She even said as much. She had dreams, she had hopes and all of that. All right, so let's dig into that. Matter of fact, if you don't want to give Fontaine or Charles the credit, let's look into the other drug dealer. I forget his name at the moment, but old boy that shot him. Let's get into why he got into, because he ain't a clone. there's depth into that. There's a story behind why he started doing what he did. And I feel like we kind of intentionally avoid getting into that because then it would contradict the messaging of the movie, which kind of proves the point that we're making with these videos.
Yo, what's wrong with this thing? Your projector must be broken, nigga. Through this film, it's revealed that street niggas like Fontaine and Charles, as well as the preacher and Frog, the homeless dude outside the liquor store, are all clones. The purpose of which is to disrupt and control the black community, along with a bevy of other projects like drugging the chicken, grape drink, and hair supply, as well as using music as a form of mind control. This clearly reeks of respectability politics, political analysis, right for the lack of nuance and its propensity for bootlicking. Not only that, it's fundamentally a projection from a group who its very existence is due to them and their ancestors choosing to adopt the ways of the colonizer himself. Cause truth be told, for better and for worse, street niggas never conformed. Which doesn't mean we haven't internalized our oppression, cause everyone in this society has. However, it is not an intentional choice to assimilate, unlike those who most raise these type of flawed and blatantly incorrect critiques. Obviously, I'm not saying there's never been individuals who have conformed, but as a collective, we have refused to assimilate.
I wish I didn't have to explain this motherfucking shit, but it's America, of course. Oh look, there's Kanye.
You know I...
Hey, shut the hell up, you black son of a bitch. What's wrong with y'all? Thank God for the white man's infinite mercy, Martin Luther King.
Despite the rhetoric, we are not the weapons of the system, but victims of it. The true weapons of the system are the bourgeois intellectuals, the lawyers, PhDs, and the quote-unquote professionals.
I feel with them that it is impossible for us with our limited means to attempt to educate the body of the people. We must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern. A class of persons, Indian in color and blood, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. To that class, we may leave it to refine the vernacular dialects of the country, to enrich those dialects with terms of science borrowed from the Western nomenclature, and to render them by degrees fit vehicles for conveying knowledge to the great mass of the population.
Macaulay's description of the European ambitions for India should most likely sound familiar, given this is the role of Western education as a whole, to form ambassadors for the colonizers within our communities, helping to indoctrinate us with the agenda of those who oppress us, and elevating themselves to the status of so-called leaders. And I must emphasize this, whether these bourgeois intellectuals claim themselves progressive or conservative, Democrat or Republican, they play the same goddamn role. It's also why they felt the need to scapegoat the underclass. It's projection at its finest.
And if you look at the history of like indigenous people in the US, like the first thing they did to strip them of their language and their culture was to put them into like white people's schools, to make them assimilate and become like the white man in their mind. So there is a history of that here. I'm sure the theory goes in all different directions, but starts in the same place. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that guy was the first, like where it started, but it definitely is core to white supremacy to have people like adapt themselves to that ideology.
There's a middle class politic, what they call an intra Black community issue around this question of class. Glenn Ford, he used to write for the Black Agenda Report, and he used to call it the Black Misleadership Class, you know, and may he rest in peace. The person that clones Fontaine is a representative of that. This Negro who thinks he knows better for the whole entire race and try to fit himself as like the broker or the middle person, you know, working with the state in order to do what he thinks is best for everybody. There's a whole conversation to be had about counterinsurgency and the use of elites and music and culture to kind of get people thinking about democracy in ways that don't really challenge the status quo, that separate the political or the economic from the cultural, that, you know what I mean? I think one of the things that bothers me, again, is like this oversimplification of how those things operate.
Regardless of how much value you may have gotten out of your education, you do have to recognize that the concept of the academy is to be a neo-colonial project. Is to teach the people of whatever the colony is, even if the colony is internal, to think like the Europeans, to think like them. That's why I think it's so many of the rituals are still steeped in that. The way the education is managed and like designed, it speaks to that. It is effective in that regard and has been from day one. Even the HBCUs, like the HBCUs are very different. They do some amazing stuff. Shout out to all my fellow HBCU grads, but understand, you might want to look, Dr. Ball has like a couple of videos. I think it's called Not a Different World, because Dr. Ball teaches at HBCU. They still abide by the same overall structure, and they don't got as much money.
My whole dad's side went to HBCUs, like in the North Florida, Georgia region. They teach you how to code switch, how to be around white people, like really just like the tips and tricks to assimilation. Yeah, that shit, it took him like a while to unlearn, low key.
This isn't to say being an intellectual is bad. Far from it. This whole video is an intellectual analysis. However, the foundational motivation and perspective matters, as well as whose lens it is seen through and for what purpose.
So you in it for the money or the knowledge?
When you are trained in the ivory tower, it's only to expand the ivory from the halls of the academic institutions to the minds of our people. The role is not to educate, especially for our benefit. And though there are some notable brothers and sisters who overcame the institution's vision for them, they are exceptional for that reason. They are not the standard.
All right, everybody, I was dead wrong. I need y'all to go out and donate to the Democrats. Sorry, y'all. I have a clone problem going on. If you can't tell, never donate to the Democrats. Don't follow them either. Subscribe here instead, because we got some real politics for you. If you can't tell, overthrow media need to support much more than those fascists over there. You can not only do that by subscribing, but you can go to the Patreon and become one of our shoulders, my nigga. Really, that just means you donate money. Don't actually pop nobody. That violates TOS. Or if you want to show me love right now but don't want to commit, you can always buy me a coffee. Both are in the descriptions right now.
The Standard claims themselves leaders, appointed only by the institution that either educates them or pays them. Institutions that fundamentally benefit off our oppression, ushering our people away from direct action and into the hands of the colonizer. Saying, if we just elect this traitor or that traitor, it will be better than the hands of the masses.
Look at my African American over here.
Though her hands are the master's hands, his punishment is the master's punishment. Their interests are the master's interests. Even when they resist, they do it within the construct. And they shepherd our people away from militancy, away from actual decolonial movements. They are screaming it puts our children in danger. We need to vote in someone to represent us to change things from the inside. Blatantly ignoring our reality so they can pretend their electoral and from the inside solutions are effective. They spread the idea that being too radical is a threat to the vulnerable, ignoring the fact that the real threat is their apathy.
You're stealing from those who themselves are stealing the lifeblood from our city. You are a parasite who leeches off
just like you,
the culture of drugs. Excuse me? What?
I got the shotgun. You got the briefcase.
As every time the clock moves another minute and we don't resist, we move closer to our young seeing an unlivable future.
The intellectual who for his part has adopted the abstract universal values of the colonizer is prepared to fight so that colonist and colonized can live in peace in a new world. But what he does not see, because precisely colonialism and all its modes of thought has seeped into him, is that colonist is no longer interested in staying on and coexisting once the colonial context has disappeared. Frantz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth.
Beastification of the black underclass. To achieve and maintain these internal social political frameworks, there is a clear demarcation, lines drawn in the sand between the haves and the have-nots, to limit the impact of those of us deemed undesirable. those who tend to be the most affected by the outcomes of whatever mandate, or I guess y'all like to call it policy, the state decrees. Within this, there becomes a necessity for a degree of beastification of the black underclass, the lumpen proletariat, you know, the niggas. We see it most clearly in the language, speaking of cement jungles, or even as I said, guerrilla tactics.
And yes, nigga, I know they're two different words. Gorilla and gorilla aren't the same, but you think the rest of these Americans know that? Exactly.
Black men are considered bulls. We see women, especially sex workers, referred to as stallions or stable hoes, right? Don't get me wrong. We can reclaim some of this for sure as the black underclass, but not all of it. Yes, I get it's rooted in anti-blackness all around, but it gets a little more complex than that. Further, the material reality is much more dire. We see it also in the language around when we are killed. How we're often seen as wild animals that need to be put down. How we are often spoke of in almost zoological ways. Even when it comes to the way we are perceived in film, on YouTube. There's always some white guy trying to be the Jane Goodall of the hood, you know what I mean?
On this episode of What? The Whites Wonder.
They shot the white boy, Brandon Buckingham.
Beastification leads to things like what happened to Jordan Neely, where shouting becomes a death sentence. Not only did Daniel Penny see him as an animal, but I question if Daniel would have even unalived the animal in the way he did Jordan. You definitely see it when we are unarmed and some cop or self-appointed racist vigilante removes us from this plane of existence. It allows us to perpetually be the villains, not just to white folks, but to the black bourgeois intellectuals, the petite bourgeoisie, and even some layers of the black proletariat, the working class. We are often portrayed in this movie, as well as everyday life, as agents of chaos for daring to survive. Turning names such as Pookie and Ray Ray or Shanika and Shawanda into damn near slurs. Now we must remember to be humble in approaching this, given at one point in our lives or another, we probably perpetuated the same type of behavior ourselves, even while suffering from this degradation. However, one of the biggest problems with reaching our more uppity, black brunch, white suit head ass brothers and sisters is they refuse, much like white men, to see our full humanity. They speak of us as if we are a generational curse that chases them, a ghost of Christmas past, a relic of a more violent and oppressive era.
People in my position are like, there's this unspoken shame that we might be like y'all deep down inside. You know what I'm saying? You have all this embattlement from the black excellences of the world. And we, as you've astutely talked about on numerous occasions, we're the managerial class of y'all. We hold all the cultural currency and none of the cultural power. So we get to pull swag from y'all, put a little shine on it, put it in the best possible package, sell it to white people and back to y'all and act like it's ours. In the meantime, creating as much space as possible between us and y'all as we can.
Often, many distance themselves, complaining about our visibility being an affront to their very being. We make them look bad with our alleged ignorance, and most of all, our alleged violence. Who they showing off to? You might take a guess. When they envision this, they think of the cycles of gun and knife violence, the robberies, the fights, but they conveniently exclude their own violence from the same cycle despite they are exponentially more violent than we are. The bloodiest hands often never touch the dirt. Instead of grabbing a pistol, they utilize state violence to enact their vengeance. They will talk stop the violence while having folks enslaved or even gunned down by the state via the injustice system. They will talk against violence while they evict their black tenants who has a family of 6 because they are $100 short on a $1,700 rent. They will buy and flip a black family's house that ran into hard times at a heavy discount. They will plan with local authorities to gentrify our neighborhoods utilizing police terror. And all this is just scratching the fucking surface. They delude themselves to believe because they utilize the guns of the state that it isn't violent. But they couldn't be more oblivious to material reality. Beastification quickly turns to demonization or deification when it comes to those who we speak of as ancestors and elders of renown.
Jesus is white, goddammit!
Some months back, I saw the show The Big Cigar. It was the story of how a Hollywood director helped the founder of the Black Panthers, Huey P. Newton, escape to Cuba. I was highly concerned because of the context of the situation. Huey at that point had fallen deeply into cocaine addiction and had become increasingly erratic due to the combination of COINTELPRO and a lack of sobriety for years. He was accused of unaliving Kathleen Smith, a 17-year-old who was turning tricks on the streets of the Bay on August 6, 1974. There are two sides of this. One is that Huey has always been a cold-blooded murderer, and everything he did was for his own benefit. The other is he is completely innocent, and it was a soft assassination by the state to destroy a Black messiah. Truth is most likely somewhere in the middle. But due to the need to deify or demonize, we are unable to learn the necessary lessons to do better. So Huey becomes either an altruistic revolutionary or a nigga from the block that was dangerous, self-aggrandizing, and fooled the Negroes. In reality, it's much more nuanced. I definitely believe Huey P. Newton started with the most noble, if not altruistic, intent. However, after seeing most of his contemporaries assassinated by the US government, having a whole nation conspire against him and his, and consuming a boatload of blow, he became a shattered, broken man. This in no way excuses anything he may have done, but shows a full picture. I was honestly terrified they were gonna lionize or demonize him. To be clear, I'm not quick to believe the state's version of things, but in the same vein, the streets were actually saying he was acting a fool. All the hesitation around that movie comes from the result of flattening street niggas. And let's be very clear. The fact that he's given this degree of benefit of doubt also may have something to do with that PhD he has. Oh wait, you thought I was gonna glaze or cast the whole fucking time? Nah, bruh. I want balance and transparency. Though I think squares are tangibly worse than us, doesn't mean I think we are angels. Let's keep it a fucking buck. That would just be another way of flattening us. Becoming human, the conclusion. Truth is, we aren't Fontaine. We ain't Slick Charles. We ain't Biddy, or even Yo-Yo. We are Junebug, the child who wants nothing more than be a part of this world, consistently being shaped by the circumstances around us, just trying to get a little extra bread and stay fed in a grim world that has never shown folks like us a drop of empathy. Callous to our traumatic environment from infancy. Because the scars are so often our reality, the callous we build becomes our armor. Armor that in one moment is seen as absolutely glorious, and in the next is seen as something hellishly dreadful. What folks do not see is the flesh, blood, and bone that exists underneath. The child that's not only carrying the scars from his existence, but the scars that are passed down from his ancestors. And all that child wants to do is be loved, heard, play Magic the Gathering, and drink a strawberry bubble tea. Okay, that last part might be my inner child specifically. But still, we honestly want to be able to survive and maybe, just maybe, thrive. Yet at every turn it seems like it's denied us even having the opportunities. Reason being, we can't get past being seen as two-dimensional beasts, as the world contrives a myriad of justifications to why we are assigned to being seen as subhuman.
At the level of individuals, violence is a cleansing force. It frees the native from his inferiority complex and from his despair and inaction. It makes him fearless and restores his self-respect. Franz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth.
For me, the most powerful scene in that movie was when, you know, the hood comes together and they all decide we're going to go bring the system down, right? And I felt like that was powerful because I feel like if we ever were to get to that point, that's what it's going to be, right? You know, going back to Fanon's analysis, that is who is built to be the vanguard for the quote unquote revolution, whatever way that manifests itself.
In the end, we are left to find our way to become human. The bourgeois intellectuals think that comes from assimilation, however, we know the truth. That is just internalizing the Western hegemonic dysfunction. Instead, we need active, present resistance. This is where the movie gets it right. The underclass has and will always be at the forefront of the resistance, the vanguard, to quote the Panthers, because we have everything to gain, but nothing to lose but our shackles. And it seems like it might be time that we slide with our Impala chariots.
One of the few movies that I've seen that makes the point that at the end of the day, because you think of like Get Out, or you think of like American Fiction, or any of those other movies that focus on race relations, right? It's always reduced to interpersonal racism, right? They clone time. I can't really think, and maybe you can tell me of some other ones, but I can't really think of another movie, aside from just a straight up blaxploitation movie from like the 70s or something, that makes the point that no, it's not just interpersonal racism that's the problem. It's a system. The real enemy of Black folks is not any individual white person or any individual or any group of individual white people. It's the state itself, right? And that, I don't think, that is the reason why I personally, with all of the flaws, with all of the problems that we're going to get into, that's why I still give it credit for going there, because a lot of, or matter of fact, no mainstream movies are really willing to go there, because how white people are going to take that. So that's pretty much where I'm at right now.